morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this week's Weekly Energy Boost. My name is Elisheva, and I am here with a very special guest who is going to be with us next week as well to share her unique insight and experience in the creative world. Not that we're not all creators, but you'll see what I mean in a moment. Erin Featherston is joining us, and Erin is a designer and also a longtime student of Kabbalah and has a wealth of wisdom and talent and experience that she's going to share with us over the next 2 episodes to help all of us bring more light into the more material parts of our lives, our homes and our closets. And I can't tell you how excited I am because this is an area of my own personal life as well as the lives of many people I know that doesn't seem spiritual or enlightened or ethereal, and we're going to learn how to bring more energy and spiritual value to those places and spaces in our life. Weekly Energy Boost is a 7-day spiritual weather forecast where we aim to provide our listeners with the most powerful and practical tools to navigate the coming 7 days. We do that by sharing wisdom and tools from the teachings of Kabbalah, and every week we end up sharing those wisdom and tools that can be used any day of the week, any week of the year. And this week is no different. We're focusing specifically on designing our homes with the soul in mind, because this week, the universe is telling us that if we don't create space for the light in our lives, if we don't make room for soulful, spiritual conversations, people, and experiences, they're not going to fall out of the clear blue sky. And this week specifically, we're given the opportunity to rethink and renovate and redesign our lives in a more structural sense. So even though we're going to be talking about physical and spiritual and marrying the two, the goal is ultimately for spiritual gains. And when we work on a spiritual level, it trickles down into the physical, into the material, and also into the way we feel in our own lives, in our bodies, in our minds, and of course, in our hearts. So thank you, Erin, for being here. I'm very excited. And I find when we bring guests with their own areas of expertise, I end up forgetting to talk and contribute. So hopefully I'll find opportunities to share as well. But I think the beginning of the conversation for me, whenever we talk about the more materially focused parts of our lives, and part of bringing you here is that you have that marriage between what you know and your experience in everything you do professionally. And Erin is not only an interior designer, but is also a clothing designer and has a lot of other different projects going on at any given time. But for me, anytime you're talking about creating something, whether it's a space or an item, artwork, a meal even, part of what we do when we create is we put our energy into manifestation, right? Even when, you had said earlier about cooking a meal, right? Do you want to eat food that your mother cooked for you or that your enemy cooked for you, right? Of course, we would all choose. I mean, and sometimes people's mothers are their enemies and we have to leave space for that as well. But in your experience and your opinion, which comes from the experience as well, what's the most important intention? Because I think that that's really part of the lesson of this week, is that if our intention is to reveal light, it'll be revealed somewhere. What do you find is the most important intention for you when approaching a creative project, or especially when it's for someone else? Yeah. And you have to sort of step into their shoes to create something for them. How do you go about that process?
Well, I think actually identifying what the intention is a very important first step. Now, of course, the best intention is revealing light, but it could be more specific. So, for example, if I'm brought in to design a home for a family, there's going to be certain intentions at play versus a workspace or a hospitality type of space. But I feel like it all ends up boiling down to taking care of people. And that's actually what I've connected to the most in my work doing interior design. I feel like it's such a beautiful way for me to use my skills to really take care of people. And I put all of my heart into that. So whether it's a family, you've got the individual members of a family that you need to take into consideration. What are all of their needs? You're trying to also foster an opportunity for unity, connectedness, togetherness. And there's so many ways that a space, if thoughtfully designed, can really support those goals. But it does take a lot of consideration to get it right.
And is there advice or guidance you can offer for somebody who's even just thinking about, I mean, if I think about redecorating my house, it's kind of like, oh my God, I can't even, just because
yes, of course.
there's something about the stability in the home that I crave and love coming home to, that it is that constant, unchanging place. Yes. How do you face that when you know you need a change or an upgrade with the right consciousness and the right energy?
I hear you. It is definitely harder to sort of turn an existing space upside down. In an ideal scenario, you would have these considerations upon entering a new space. So maybe I can share those, and then we can talk about how it could be applied when you're already set up, and maybe it's not practical to turn your whole house upside down, but there can always be something applied. I recently went through this. I moved into a new home. It's already been 2 years, but it feels like it was just yesterday. And there was so many steps that I went through in my consideration before we even put a single piece of furniture in the home. And I think that a lot about what makes a home successful is not just what you see, what color your drapes are, and what kind of sofa you have and where you put your rug. A lot of it is also about what you don't see in a space that can make it successful. So, I'm not a feng shui master, but I do always work with one when it comes to myself. This is not always something I can bring into client projects. Of course, there has to be an openness, but for myself personally, I do work with a feng shui master. She also studies Kabbalah. Her name is Annette Halfon, and we can share her information. But what she does is she does a feng shui based chart similar to an astrological
I've had a chart done with her before. Yeah.
She does it for each member of the family, and then she does it for the house. So you're doing this layered analysis of your individual family members, the family as a whole, and the house itself. And that already gives you a lot to start with. Right. But I consulted her when I was in escrow on my house to even just start thinking about, who am I going to put in what bedroom? Setting up the functionality of the house, thinking about the flow of the house. To me, that was a step one. Step two is actually addressing a lot of the invisible systems in the house. One of the first things that I did was bring in someone to read the EMF of the house, which is the electric magnetic frequency that is being emitted by a house. And that is coming off EMF is getting a lot more attention in terms of how it relates to Wi-Fi enabled devices, which emit a lot of EMF, but even just any electrical system is going to emit EMF. So we came and did a reading there and did some EMF remediation in the house. And, it's invisible, but immediately I could feel an energy shift when we did all of that remediation to a much more sense of calm. And when I work with clients who are, especially those who are wellness oriented and spirituality oriented, this is always something that I encourage them to do. Then we tackled the energetic zone. And I had your husband and Yehuda Ashkenazi come and do an amazing space cleansing ritual, which I'm sure you can provide more information about. But this is like the, burning some sage on steroids.
Right. We've talked about that, but we won't get into it today. But you can look in the library of Weekly Energy Boost. We've had many episodes on space cleansing, clearing energy from physical spaces, decluttering the home, we've touched on the topic of your personal vessel or temple before, but we've never approached it from a design, color, structure space. So,
well, I'm glad you touched on clutter, because then, so once I had kind of did those 3 tiers, which is to me a lot more about.
I love the unseen part, by the way, because I think
energetic planning.
People don't speak
then
like that.
To me, I actually first think about all of the practical things before I get to the like decorative pillows. That's the icing on the cake, the cherry on top. So, you want to think through what is going to be the flow going through a space, and then to create the proper infrastructure to support that. And that applies to clutter and organization as well. So for example, when we were moving to this new house, it's a house from the 1920s. It has very, very little storage space, very few closets. And that was really the first thing that we attacked was, if we're going to bring all of our stuff into this space, like I want to know where everything is going to land. And even thinking about the patterns, like we have a front door, we have a back door. How do we want to guide the flow? Okay, I think we're going to mostly be having guests coming through the front door. We're going to use the back door for our family, and then creating like a mudroom storage, a place for shoes, a drop-off zone. Because if you don't establish those zones from the beginning, then everyone's stuff just ends up all over the place. And to me, that begins the chaos.
Right.
So with a space, I'm always trying to create the structure of order. And so thinking through where everything you have, where does it need to go? What needs to be accessed at what point in the day? And thinking through that infrastructure is very helpful. I mean, when that house was empty, I went and opened every cabinet door, took photos of it, printed the photos out, and then at home with Post-its, started to write things like towels, the plates, these plates, where is everything going to go? And actually using a Post-it note to stick on all of these photos. And then that shows you, oh, geez, we're not going to have enough space for this or that. And then you need to make a plan. So to me, having that infrastructure in place is so essential, because having a functional, organized, orderly home is very important.
For sure. And I'm going to stop you there just to give the energetic side of that coin, is that one of the great Kabbalists, Rav Isaac Luria, the Ari, talks about clutter as a inhibitor for clairvoyance, for prophecy, for clarity. So you can listen to this conversation and say, wow, that's really interesting, but it's not really relevant to me. You may not be decorating or redecorating your home right now, but the underlying concept in what you're sharing is, in order for the energy in a home to flow, and maybe you don't have a whole home to decorate, maybe you have 3 rooms, maybe you have 1 room, the physical objects and order in the room can interfere with the spiritual energy flow in the room. And it sounds even funny to say it. And I'm always so impressed with how Kabbalists from 1,000, 2,000 years ago could frame things in a way that we would still need it in 2024. But if you're feeling blocked creatively, one of the Kabbalistic remedies for that is to organize your stuff. Like literally.
Oh, works every time.
It is amazing. And so keeping in mind that, we're trying to keep our feet in both worlds right now. On one hand, caring for people and making sure that everything has its place and is in its place, and making, in a way, simplifying life because of that. But at the same time, the spiritual benefit to that is not only seen, but also unseen. So it's not just check it off, you've done it, but literally to make sure that order and organization and functionality is maintained for your energy, not just for your knowing where everything is and making sure your house doesn't look messy.
Yeah. And to me, it also really supports peace in the home, because especially in family life, you've got multiple family members. Everyone might have their own little habits, or, just if everybody knows where they're supposed to put their things and where they can find the things, I feel like that already brings a level of tension, way down.
No, I literally want to run. When my house is messy, I'm the first person who says, I'm going for a walk, because I need to pull myself up by my bootstraps before I can tackle.
Yeah.
the natives, let's call them.
Yeah.
So go on. You did all that picturing and labeling and everything.
So there's that infrastructure is very important, and just knowing that everything needs to have a place. Then we start to get into a little bit more of a decorative space. For me personally, I am always looking to maximize natural light. That's pretty much my number one objective when I go into any project. And pretty much every house is going to have at least one window. Hopefully you have a lot of windows, but whatever you're working with, there's always going to be some ways to amplify and maximize that. And that's certainly always one of my objectives. That's my personal taste. There's other styles out there that, are not so hinged on natural light, but I personally feel that brings a lot to the home. And I think when people come to my home, it's something that is often remarked on. Oh, I feel I can breathe here. Oh, the space is so light and airy. And it does, to me, bring an ethereal quality to the space. So thinking through the windows and where you have natural light coming in and what you might be able to do to reflect and amplify that light is something I give a lot of thought to. That could influence my choice of paint colors. For example, some colors really reflect light, whereas others absorb it and therefore create a darker space. So, for example, in this home that I recently moved into, the kitchen was actually a little bit alley-like. It was a little bit dark, and it had dark granite countertops, and it was painted a gray color. And I painted everything white and brought in white countertops. And it's not just the color. It's that the countertops, actually, it's not quite a mirror, but it's a reflective surface. So in a way, it's almost like, have you ever seen someone on the photo shoot and they're holding like the big white disc because they're bouncing light? It totally works like that.
I love that.
And I opened up one wall in my house, and it was between the dining and the kitchen, and that opened up a light exposure there. And now that space feels so light and luminous and airy, and it's a place that you want to be. Another little thing I do is I always give a lot of thought into window treatments. I think that they really do a lot to a space when they're thoughtfully done, and there's a lot of ways to do them. But like a little trick I always do is, you might have for example, in my house, I have a square-shaped window, and it's really in the middle of the wall, meaning there's about as much space from the top of the window frame to the ceiling as there is from the window sill to the floor. In my living room, I added a Roman shade and drapes. And the way that I positioned it is I put it all the way as high as I could go on the ceiling. And it makes it look all of a sudden like I've got a long, more classically proportioned rectangular window that might be just slightly obscured with this shade. But really, the shade's just sitting on the wall. And it makes the windows just feel like they're so much taller, and they really command a lot of attention. And so to me, a window is like, depending on what you've got outside your window doesn't always work, but to me, a window is just as important as art.
And not coincidentally, in that same conversation about organizing your space to have more clarity and channeling, Rav Isaac Luria talks about the importance of being able to see the sky from where you sit. So talking feng shui, Kabbalistic feng shui states that where you spend most of your time, you should be able to see clear, like the sky, from where you sit. So there's a lot of conversation around skylights, being close to a window, constantly having that connection with, and this is a word you didn't use, but I think it's something that's underlying what you've just shared, is to really have an expansive space.
Yes.
One that isn't confining or shrinking, but that gives you that feeling of, I can rest my energy here. I am safe. I am supported, and I can grow here.
Yeah. Yes. Expansive is always what I'm going for. And then just even the way that every floor plan is different and every space presents its own opportunities and its own limitations. And so, that's always the puzzle of each new project. Sometimes you can't move walls. Right. Sometimes you could be in a New York City studio, which I've lived in them, and you may have a window, but you still need to turn on the news to know if it's raining or not, because it's inches away from another brick wall. I had those places too. So, sometimes you can't do everything, but, even a mirror opposite a window is a great way to basically add another window. So there's lots of little tricks you can do there. I think, another important thing, this is something I always share with moms and in setting up family spaces, especially, you may not have the opportunity to design a kitchen from scratch, but if you do, something I always try and say, and I did for myself, is when you're standing at your sink, which is where
you stand a lot.
I personally find myself standing a lot,
right?
Taking care of 3 kids. That from that point of view, I want to have as many sight lines to places where my children might be as possible. Because if you can't see them, it's going to be hard to basically multitask. So when I was setting up my home, that was the first place I stood. I'm going to stand behind the sink. And what are my sight lines? What areas can I see to? And then I actually really tried to build the children's spaces into those areas so that they'll be drawn there. That way I can interact with them, talk to them, play with them, while also preparing a meal or doing whatever I need to do in the kitchen.
That's amazing.
Multitasking.
That's very forward thinking.
But the house that I lived in previously, which was the house where I became a mom, when I was standing at the sink, I couldn't see anything. So I was always having to turn around or go to another room, or, everyone was gravitating towards the kitchen and there really wasn't enough space to accommodate children there. So it was a problem. Mm-hmm. So that was actually...
I'm always kicking my kids out of the kitchen. It's so true.
Well, it gets a little crowded.
Very crowded very quickly.
It gets a little crowded. So it's nice to be able to still be in relationship with them from that point of view. So that's, to me, it would be like it was a top factor in choosing what the next space would be. Was that.
That's very powerful. I don't know that when we make changes, usually it's motivated by it's usually reactive, right? Maybe when you're building a new house to be the way you want it to, you have the ability to have the foresight and the vision and think through those steps. But so much of the way that we make changes is firefighting. That's what I call it. It's putting out fires, and to hear that there is at the root or the seed level, to be able to implant that expansiveness, that ability to do more than one, wear more than one hat at once and not need to compromise on being present and being available, is very powerful as well. I think one of the challenges that comes up for people when they share space with others, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, is, you may live with other people. Probably most people live with other people. If you don't, maybe it isn't an issue, but in a family home, how do you create your own space in a space that you share with other people? So I'm not talking, my bedroom might be my bedroom. I do happen to share it with someone else too, but it's like claiming your energy in a space where your energy is never isolated.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Well, there's a few ways that I could address that. I am thinking of one example that comes to mind, which I want to share. It's not so much directed towards moms, but I think something, especially in a family where you might have children of different ages, especially young children, I started to think about a room also. Usually we think about
a box.
It's a box, right? Mm-hmm. You've got walls, a ceiling, and a floor. And when I started having my own children and spending more time in family homes, I started to actually think about the room on planes. And there's different planes of existence and there's different eye lines. So, for example, like a fun tip I always give my clients with children is I say, oh, cheap rug, expensive light fixture. Put your money on the ceiling, for example, where it's pretty much out of harm's way.
Right.
A rug, it might, if you have young children, it might get beat up. It might be a little bit less stressful for you to get something that you won't feel bad about replacing. Regularly. Right. It's not a huge investment. Right. So I can remember my best friend has 6 children and she was expecting her 5th. And so there was quite a range of ages. And she asked me if I could help redo one room in the house that was going to be this interesting multi-purpose room for her where she needed a gathering space where she could relax. And she was anticipating time with her newborn and have her other 4 children around her who are a range of ages from toddler to, probably the oldest was 10. And from spending time in her home, I noticed that there was often a lot of conflict coming around tabletops. So, for example, the 10-year-olds are doing an elaborate, thoughtful art project or building project. And then the toddler comes by and is interfering and just being a toddler. So I remember in that room, I thought about the different planes of existence. So I said, okay, let's get a pub height table and 2 stools that go with that. And that's going to be the art table for the older children. A 42-inch high table is out of reach of the 2-year-old toddler. Mm-hmm. So they can do all of their art there. That's going to be their station. That's going to be for them. And they know anything they leave there is not going to be taken out by a younger child. We're going to have a coffee table, which is going to service your day bed lounger where you can be with the newborn. And we're going to put little tiny stools underneath. And that's going to now be the toddler play zone. So creating experiences at different heights in the room can be a good problem solve for different age children when they're going through those stages.
While you're talking, I'm thinking about the spiritual laws that support what you're saying. And to me, what you just said says in different words that, and you said it actually in the beginning, the idea of creating a space is a form of taking care of people, right? You want people to feel taken care of. And thinking about those planes of existence is making sure that everybody in the family is taken care of and their needs are met. It goes back to the first thing we spoke about when we started today's episode of there's no darkness, there's only absence of light. So when we create space, effectively, we're creating it to be filled. You create the space for the toddler, for them to take up that space, to own it, to belong to it, for it to belong to them, and vice versa. And this week, I think, is asking us to take account, to audit, to inventory our desires and our goals, and to make sure that we're creating the space for them. So that if we want greater abundance, greater prosperity, but we're still on the hamster wheel, doing what we can do, we need to make room for expansiveness. We want to make room for, if you're looking for a relationship, you need to make space for a partner. I've had, we've spoken about it before, but I have a student that would love to be in a relationship, but doesn't want to share her physical space with anybody. So we were talking about baby steps, making space in your closet so that if somebody did need to visit, that they would feel welcome. And that's another example of creating a vessel, not only for another person's energy, but for another experience of reality, which to me, it sounds like that's what this whole design effort is about. It's about making sure that you have the space to experience the reality that you desire. Yeah.
And I think when everybody's needs are met, there's just much more harmony. Those clashes come out from, hey, there's no space for me here, so I'm now infringing on your space.
Right. And that goes back to the idea that the light force of the creator, we have this phrase that we say, there's no coercion in spirituality. You can't force light into a vessel. The universe cannot force us to change. We cannot, our soulmate cannot be forced upon us there. If we don't create that vessel, and vessel is an expression of desire. So that desire for belonging, for space, for recognition, for acknowledgement, I think it's so important in the home. That's why I'm having that question of, yes, I am all over the house, but is there a part of the house that's uniquely mine? I don't know.
I mean, I feel like I'm kind of laughing on the inside because I feel like that's like a sitcom moment where the husband is saying, I need a man cave. You have the whole house.
Right.
And it's like, oh, which room is mine? The kitchen? The laundry
exactly,
room?
the bathroom.
I mean, I feel a little bit like that too. I have young children, so, there's not a lot of privacy or boundaries, but I do just try to I don't know. I mean, I set up the house and I'm a designer, so I at least made it the way that I love. So I love the whole house, but it doesn't really feel like there's any one space that's just for me yet, but maybe I'll feel differently when my children are older.
What's funny is I kept my nursing chair, even though I'm not long past nursing, but I kept my nursing chair because no one else nurses. So therefore it's my chair.
Yeah.
And so that to me, I created around that, bookshelf and like a little side table, and that's where I meditate and that's where I read and that's where but it's probably 4x4, like it's a 5x5 in my bedroom kind of thing. It's very small. But I want to make sure that we give you time to share how the knowledge and the wisdom of Kabbalah that you've received over the years has influenced your process, and not even in design, but just even your creative process. Like how did it change when you started to understand those concepts, those principles? Or maybe there's one principle that really influenced or changed the way you work.
That's such a great question. And I'm not, to be honest, I'm not sure I have like a perfect fast answer to that. I think creativity has been a part of me since I can just remember being a conscious being. So to me, that feels like just a gift that was given to me by the creator. And I think as I've studied the wisdom of Kabbalah and spirituality, I've started to appreciate that as a gift and a way that I can share. And even if you think about in love languages, that's like the people that I love the most, I'll bringing them beautiful flowers or, bringing them something for their home. That's like an easy way for me to really show my care. That just comes to me naturally. Some people will cook a meal for you and that's like their way to show their love. And I think, creating beauty through physicality is a way that I express my love. And I've started to appreciate, what a powerful tool it is. I started my career in fashion and had moments of, especially when I was actually at the beginning of studying Kabbalah, actually questioning, well, is this a spiritual endeavor? Questioning it. Like, is this kind of superficial? Is this just silly? Is this, maybe it's not spiritual. And I think there's a lot of narratives out there that made me question. And ultimately I realized, well, this is my gift and this is a way for me to help people feel good. And I always do see the end result is very positive when I am able to lend my hand or lend my eye to someone's space. So I think just appreciating that, I don't know.
Something you said struck a chord with me because I know a lot of creative people that don't make a living from their creativity, that don't, maybe in the justification that it's not practical or it's it's not going to pay the bills. So they sort of deny or repress that creative part of themselves because it's just not practical right now. Or, if it's not going to make a difference in people's lives, why should I do it? But I think that the recognition that we all have gifts, and if something becomes a gift, like we all have a lot of possessions, but those possessions become gifts when we share them. And so whatever talent or whatever you do that makes you happy, part of the responsibility of having that talent is sharing it with the world. So even if it only benefits one other person, it's gone from a talent to a gift. And I think that that's also a vessel for revealing light, like your unique light. If you had decided to be an accountant instead of a designer, that light wouldn't be able to be expressed. Like you're a unique channel for that unique expression of the light of the creator. And I feel like that's the biggest message of this week is, are we really creating space for the light to be revealed through us and for us? And even though designing or redecorating is not something people do every day of the week, I do feel that restructuring and reorganizing and making space for more of what we want in our lives is like an obligation on a regular basis. Just because it always was doesn't mean it needs to stay that way.
Yeah.
And thinking in terms of what else can I be doing to create more room for light? Erin, do you have any tips or any consciousness that we can use not only this week, but anytime about the home and creating our space?
Absolutely. I think something that I see a lot, and I think you'll understand what I mean, is that you can either be proactive about what comes into your space or reactive, or sometimes people are somewhere in the middle. So I see this a lot as an interior designer. I even see it with my clients. So for example, I could have a client who brings me in, I'm as a professional interior designer, and I do every detail and the house is beautiful. I do my install, take photos, and then, all the time it happens, I'll go back in a few weeks and I'm like, this doesn't look quite as good as those photos because, weird things have entered the space, or like, what is this pillow? It doesn't belong here. And, oh, well, my mother-in-law gave it to us. And so now it kind of has to be part of the story. I hear people give commentary like that about items in their space all of the time. Oh, well, this came from here, or this was a gift, or this was from my last house. Like usually when I see people move from space to space, I always encourage, whenever possible, to let go of what you had in your last space and get everything new. And I understand that there can be economic restraints around that, but I often feel like, sell what you can and buy new according to what the new space needs, because no floor plan is the same. The schematics are never the same. And it's always better to get something that's truly intentionally designed for that space instead of just sort of like dragging things along. And
the energy in those things with it.
And I think even in terms of maintaining a space, it drives me crazy, but I feel like I do need to spend a couple hours a week just sort of going through the house and how did you get here? What is this? And the more members of the family you have more inroads of stuff. Especially with kids, they're bringing home things all the time. And birthday parties, this is just some tchotchke that came in from a birthday party bag. And now all of a sudden it's on my kid's nightstand table in this minimalist room. I think we can get rid of it, So I'm a fierce editor, and I think people don't always feel like they can do that, but I would encourage you to be proactive about your space, meaning you have intentionally decided what is in your space and it's serving a purpose. And when you hold that, usually the items in your space remain in relationship to each other. When I think a space feels chaotic when it just feels like a mishmash and the furniture and the colors just don't relate, and then it's just getting very busy. To me, that's visual clutter. And I always try to help people calm it down. And even if that doesn't mean you can buy a whole new set of furniture, it's like, well, okay, let's look at this room and try and identify, let's say there's 10 different colors and patterns going on. Whoa, that would be a lot. Let's try and pull out the 3 dominant. So maybe you've got 3 out of 5 pieces in here have the same wood finish, but 2 of the 5 are completely different. Well, maybe we can lean into what we have that's in relationship and edit out what's not relating and try and build a story there, trying to kind of keep the number of finishes, colors, patterns, texture to a minimum so that they feel like they're in an intentional relationship. And I feel like wherever your eye can see, it all counts. And that even comes to like cords and tucking things away, cables, all of that adds to the visual clutter of a space. And I think it will affect your nervous system.
I definitely have homework after that comment. Thank you. Thank you so much. So if this conversation has sparks for those of you who are listening, I recommend that you go back into the archives and look for, I want to say we have at least 3 or 4 episodes that approach other aspects of creating the spaces and the home and the life that you want through your physical space. We had one, I think, that was called Spiritual Sanctuary that we've tackled, I think, probably once a year, every year for the last 4 years. So this is our yearly check-in about it. Next week, Erin will join us to talk about, we have a unique opportunity. I think it only happens once or twice a year to examine how we show up in the world physically, which I'm very excited about as well. If you have any questions, put it in the comments. You can always email us, energyboost@kabbalah.com. You can go to our website, weeklyenergyboost.com, send us a message there, look through the archives there and see whatever interesting things we've been talking about on the episode. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And looking forward to continuing the conversation with you in next week's episode, Erin.
Me too.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Have a fabulous week, and we'll see you next time on the Weekly Energy Boost.